Okay. So first up, standing items, status updates.
We released.
Yeah. Twice. For everyone who wasn't following in the channel yesterday, there was a bug with the 0.11.0 version of the lifecycle, specifically on GCP. We had tried to pull in node-based identity using the GGCR no client keychain, but apparently there's an issue and it can't talk to the metadata server, it hangs. I followed some of those links that Jesse provided, and it seems like the fix for that is probably queued up behind a big refactor of credential provisioning in Kubernetes in general. They're like moving to an external credential provider plugin model, and based on other issues, it seems like they probably aren't making changes in the current implementation. So I probably can't pull this back in. Does that match everyone else's understanding?
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. It didn't look like anyone was actively working to change the behavior in any of these keychains.
Yeah, I was like, we could file a bug on GGCR. And I was like, oh, that's pulling in this other repo. I was like, we can go file a bug there, but that's just copying stuff out of Kubernetes. And it seems like that's waiting on a big refactor. So
do we want to open an issue so we can fix it?
I know they reopened the issue. Or at least on our side.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Natalie reopened the issue that was tracking the node-based identity and lifecycle.
Okay.
So hopefully at least we can track there. But we
Okay,
might want to dump some more info there.
Great, thanks.
So just so I'm clear, because I can ping the right people around this. This happens for builds being done on GCP, or does this happen outside GCP?
for builds in a GCP VM, but for whatever reason, the metadata server isn't reachable. Instead of timing out and moving on to like anonymous authentication, which would have worked in these cases, it just hangs forever.
Okay.
Yeah, I can link you the issue if you don't see it, because there's an easy way to replicate it with Docker, just like locally as well, to prove it out.
Okay. So I see lifecycle 560 removal. Was there an issue around it as well? Described.
Let me check. It was kind of ad hoc yesterday, so probably not. That's probably
okay. It's weird that the metadata server wasn't available from within the VM.
Yeah, the stuff that was copied from like the K8s keychain stuff mentions that that's a possibility, but there's some amount of code for timing out and things like that, but clearly it must not always hit. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, in our case, this was like local lifecycle just happened to be on a Google VM. And that was unfortunate because they weren't actually trying to use the node-based identity. It's just supposed to kind of be a fallback if everything else fails, but it not being there caused a cascade of just hanging and nothing ever working. So
okay, all right, I'll see what I can find out.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to give a status update? That makes sense. I feel like everyone's been working on the release, who's been working on the life cycle. Delinquents like me have been like working on other things. So next up, standing item release planning. I'm going to guess there isn't a lot to talk about here because we're just starting to plan the release with the next APIs. Have we even created a milestone for it yet? Seems like we have.
Okay. Yeah, I think because we bumped stuff to it, right, from the previous one. So I think we do have a milestone in place.
Let me share.
I don't think we really talked about it much. But...
So it seems to me like we should go make sure there's nothing in the spec milestones for the 207 APIs that aren't included in here. But I don't think those milestones are finished yet. Like have we defined exactly what goes in them. Maybe we can work with the core team to make a final plan for the 07s and say new things will go into 06, because I think there's already a couple really big things in 07, including all of stack packs. Right. So we probably shouldn't be adding more things there. Because even though this is a short list compared to other releases, some of these are really big items.
There is one thing that I think we should add to this release is to automate the acceptance test. I mean, what as part of the release process, like running on Windows, running on Linux, maybe we should add some tests on GCP following the fact that we had yesterday with some other platforms. But
That makes
doing
sense.
everything manually is just
There's a chore. That chore, the fourth one in the list is for doing that.
Is it here? It's part of
Yeah, it's here, and maybe related to that is the last issue in the list, which I don't know. It's not really like tied to a specific milestone, but the idea of shipping release candidates. Actually,
Yeah.
you know, I think we had said there's only value in that if people consume them. But I think at least on the Paketo side, we have some interest in taking an RC binary and putting it in some sort of pipeline. So I don't know if that's something that the other, builder producers would like to do, but at the very least, I think that would have helped us yesterday. So this might be something to explore.
That makes sense to me. I know Pack does this. Javier, do you have any sense of like how many people actually validate the RCs?
We don't. I mean, we've definitely gotten some reports when producing an RC of certain issues that might come up during that period. But I do want to say that from Pack's perspective, at least maybe the platform team perspective, we do have interest in having an RC for the life cycle. Because if we want to get a little bit closer to the same, let's say API version that's about to be released, it would be nice to have a release candidate that we could start working with, as opposed to having to build everything by hand, right? So if I could envision this as including the lifecycle image, right, it's something else that we could at least start integrating with without having to really wait for a full release. So yeah, if the burden isn't too much, I would say it'd be grateful. Yeah, we would be grateful to have it.
How far in advance of the release do you feel like you need it in order for starting to integrate early to be useful?
That's a really good question. I think right now, Pack specifically holds off on updating the default lifecycle version upon release, just to make sure that things kind of settle down before it becomes the default for everybody as a builder. I don't know that we would push too hard to try to get things integrated much faster, but I think what it allows us to do is it enables us to be able to do it if we wanted to, right? So any given amount of leeway would be appreciated, whether it be a week or 2 weeks.
All right.
Does the lifecycle produce like a nightly or a per commit binary that can be consumed, like a latest?
I know we push lifecycle images tagged with commit numbers. I don't think we put artifacts for the lifecycle tar anywhere that you could consume them, which makes it only moderately useful because
the tars are artifacts on the GitHub action run, but it's okay. You just had to know to look there and kind of which commit to use. It's maybe we could make that easier, but it is out there.
Or even like the label on the image that could be easily consumed.
The label on the image right now is just the commit tag, so it's a little obscure.
Yeah,
So I could see
like
how
the
you
idea
could
of nightly.
enable.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Javier.
I was gonna say, I definitely think you could enable nightlies, right? By tagging a nightly thing like on everything that just gets produced. And to the point where there are, I guess, artifacts attached to the actions. They're really hard to access, for one. But I would also say that the RCs is something a little bit more than that, right? Like a nightly, like from a consumer's perspective, I don't know what the status of a nightly is, right? I don't know if there's some major issues to it. I don't know if the API is completely implemented. And so that's why I think the idea of an RC sets that like literally like the milestone, right? Or the goalpost that says this is now an attempt of something being complete so you could start working with it. Nightlies, I don't think, at least for us, would be as useful as RCs.
Especially because the APIs are atomic in some ways. So when we're between releases, you might say you're using API 07, but you really only have half of the spec features in there and you don't know exactly which ones. So unless we did something more formal with half implemented APIs, it could be a little bit confusing to people.
Yeah, I still think it would be nice to always produce images that are tagged, even if they're, get tagged as well as like nightly, even if it's not something we expect most folks to use, and especially on PRs as well. But I think this ties back into pack builder TOML needing to let you use an image instead of a tar as well, because right now we kind of have a mismatch. We're always producing images for PRs that you could go get out of the build GitHub action, but you can't. The tars are somewhere in there, but they're harder to access, like Natalie said.
That makes sense. Okay. Is there anything else in this brand new milestone that folks want to talk about today?
I wanted to talk about RC 0073, about the asset cache, because I was going to bring in something into the GCP Buildpacks to do caching using a local volume with a writable volume. So I've been meaning to go and find out what's happening with this, to see if I can contribute, because that would let me throw away some code.
Nice. I think from this RFC in a lot of ways is about how you package like vendor dependencies into an offline build pack. The lifecycle's role in this is mostly going to be around passing an environment variable through to the build packs. Like most of the work is build packs knowing to pull things out of this artifact cache.
Okay.
So I think on the lifecycle side, this is pretty simple. I have had one idea that I haven't found the right forum to ask yet, but I've been wondering if even for online build packs, like right now we have a cache that's per image in a kind of awkward way that leads to a lot of re-downloading of things. But we have some concerns around cache poisoning between builds. I was wondering if it made sense to have a shared asset cache across all builds. So like in a case as a volume. So in a case where your builder did not have an asset cache built into it, we would mount a asset cache volume, and then in different builds, build packs could contribute their assets to the cache.
So that's what I've implemented for GCP Buildpacks, and I was going to hook it into Scaffold, because that's our big concern, is that we use Scaffold from our Cloud Code products, and people hit repeated downloads if they're building across different images. And so we were going to mount a writable volume that's maintained within Scaffold, and then our build packs noted that we'll look to see if that volume exists, and if so, we'll download the artifacts in there if they're not already present, and then reuse it.
The one thing I haven't really thought about yet is if you had a builder image with some vendored assets, but not all, then the strategy wouldn't work as naturally, right? Like you'd like to be able to have a volume that captures everything that wasn't in the image.
Right. Yeah.
But
so,
also would let you pull things out of the image if they were there. And if we use the exact same location, I don't know if that works as well.
what do you mean by the image?
In the builder image, right? Because we're imagining some builder images would come with an asset cache pre-populated, but maybe it could be partially populated. Like my idea of mounting the volume when it's not there works really well if it's either 100% populated or totally empty. I don't know how well it works if you're trying to, like, I don't think there's some way to have a weird overlay where things that aren't there end up on the volume. Like maybe that's possible, but I don't think so.
Why wouldn't we just use the regular build pack cache to store things that need to be preserved between builds?
It's more of a cross builds. So if I have two images, image 1 and image 2, then that cache isn't shared between them.
But it seems like, so this is like a special case where those two images are owned by the same tenant. And so you know it's safe to be able to reuse that, right? It like, this has to be a very special scoped cache that's you know these two images are associated with each other and all the code in each of those two things can trust each other, but this external thing can't. And that's come up. We've had like, I don't know, 2 or 3 RFCs that have tried to solve that problem. This asset cache thing is a cache that is immutable during the build process. The build process can't, as it's defined now, can't contribute to it at all. It's just a way for build packs to be distributed with dependencies, if that makes sense, for air-gapped builds and things like that, so that, you know, if a platform wants to say, okay, I'm going to provide the build pack with every possible dependency, so everything is super fast and can happen without internet at all, right? Like in a cluster that's disconnected, then, you know, that's kind of what this enables. If we're talking about something that the build process can affect that works across multiple images, I like the conclusions we've got. I'm not saying we should not solve that problem, but the conclusions we've gotten to in the past discussions around that are like a caching proxy might be a good thing, because then, you know, you have some certainty if everything's checking checksums that, you know, 2 images aren't owned by the same tenant for every reason, or if one has a untrusted build pack and the other is all trusted build packs or something like that, then, you know, the caching proxy can sit outside and ensure that it's, you know, it's fast and, you know, there's more validation in that process. But I'm hesitant to introduce like a volume that's shared between, you know, builds of different images, if that makes sense.
Those problems definitely exist for our cache as we have it now. But the more I thought about it, I feel like a mutable version of this cache, where everything is namespaced under its digest and is a single file, isn't as vulnerable to the same problems, because a build pack can always check that the thing that's at the digest really has that digest. Like once it's not just any arbitrary layer, I'm going to trust what's in the metadata to figure out if it's the right thing. Like when it's literally just a cache of files and the build pack can validate that it's the one it's looking for, like maybe there isn't a lot of risk there.
I should back off and say I have not read these documents in great detail. Okay, this has been interesting. For us, we're dealing with kind of microservice applications. So we have, you know, 2, 3, 4 images, and generally they're not polyglot. So people will be using like Java images, Java for all 4 images, and so we end up downloading like the JDK 4 times, and that's painful. It's a real put off for people. So that's what we're looking to try to improve.
This is the number 1 complaint I get from talking to Spring folks. It's like, why do I have to download this JDK again? Please stop.
I'd be very hesitant to introduce, even if Buildpacks could check the checksums, because people can write code that hooks into Buildpacks in their application directory that could ignore those checksums, because, you know, in the end, like, you know, the build packs sit closer to the developer, right, than the platform components. I'd suggest that if we're going to introduce a cache that's less safe than the one we're talking about here, that's fine, but it should be more explicit, maybe separate from the, you know, asset caching, like, you know, where you're talking about something that was cached a long time ago, right? When I think of asset caching, I think of like, you know, web server, and you've pre-compiled assets ahead of time, right? And they're being distributed down, not a cache that's like per request, something gets cached on the web server, right? So to me, the intent of this was very much, you know, cache ahead of time, not cache, you know, during the build process itself, if that makes sense. But not saying we shouldn't also solve that problem. I would just be really hesitant to pull that a cache that's writable during the build process into this particular thing, unless everybody thinks I'm crazy, if that makes sense. But
think we need to do it here. I think we should talk about what exactly the risks are there. Because maybe it's worth it for the pros if, you know, it comes with caveats that, like, as a build pack, if you want to pull something from this cache, you should check it, right?
I'm gonna throw my bike sheddy type of conversation with this, but I hate the term cache being used here, right? Where I think I've already mentioned a couple times we should just use packages, because I think cache does make it seem like it's mutable, right? And not just the way that assets are packaged and distributed, which is technically what's happening here.
I think the reason why the word cache is there is because there's an idea that the assets may or may not be present, and the build pack could download them or not download them, but that, you know, it's really easy to leap from that to, and so the build pack downloads them and then caches them, right? Because it's an asset cache.
Yep.
So I would totally support removing cache from the name of the RFC if unless, I mean, that pushes away further from Emily's idea of turning it into an asset cache at the end, though. So I don't want to.
Well, if we're talking about the images, like the separate images that just have assets, I really don't like the word cache for that either. I agree with Javier that it should be an asset package. But I would also like an asset cache.
Cache could be a thing in the future, right? But for right now, I think we should talk about them as packages. And
it might be easy to implement that asset cache structure as a build pack, right? Using the 3 levels, the image local cache, the cross image cache, and the assets, right? Like, I wonder if that's something that could be created in code at the build pack level, or, you know, there's something we could do to still have that separation of concerns, but present an interface to the build pack author app developer that they are more unified, right? Like,
even before we do a nice unified thing, just if we had that third one, the cross image cache, I think it'd be a big deal. And I think we need to spec it out so that build packs, you know how to use it. You could probably do something bespoke with pack and the volume flag and a bunch of build packs who are all have an implicit contract, but it's not gonna work in the long run.
I don't have much to add, but we would use a like tenant local cache if we could for, like, you know, these sort of things.
Okay. I think that's it for release planning. Should I open the milestone up again? Did anyone else want to discuss issues there?
I did flag one of the issues in the milestone for needs discussion, but I actually think, I mean, basically, I think that the issue that says stack packs needs to be broken up into smaller issues. And I had some thoughts about how that could be done, but probably want to
part of new discussion.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to discuss it now or if it's just, you know, this is something that we should discuss at some point.
These are the needs discussions.
Yeah.
I'm actually realizing it's almost the time that I turn into a pumpkin. So I'm going to stop sharing. Does someone want to take over driving this meeting? Because I got to go for the last half hour of this.
I can share my screen.
Thank you all. I'll see you later.
Is this the right Chrome window? Yes. All right. Yeah, needs discussion. Natalie, you were saying support stack packs, needs discussion on how to break this up into smaller chunks of work. I agree that is something we want to do. Do we want to discuss that today, or do we want to set aside some time for that?
I think probably our time would be better used if we moved on to other stuff, but maybe just kind of putting it out there as something that we should do relatively soon.
Yeah, I agree. The next one here, I don't have any context on this one. Is it possible to export a tarball?
I
Looks
also,
like Javier.
yeah, Javier, please speak to this.
Yeah, I have just a tad bit of context. More or less, I'm coming at it from a very different point of view. And I added it to the agenda to talk about, but I could definitely start right now, if that's okay.
Sure.
Cool. So one of the things I've been working through is Eric from Bloomberg, I believe, is or created a proof of concept for how BuildKit could, or yeah, a BuildKit front end for how cloud native Buildpacks could be integrated or incorporated there. And one of the things that came out is that the export function is the only function that needs to be re-implemented for BuildKit. And the reason for that is because currently the exporter has two ways of exporting an image, right? It's exporting them into the registry, and therefore it needs like credentials to be able to do that, or it's exporting them to the daemon, and then it needs access to that daemon, right? Whether it be through TCP or through the socket. So my initial thought was just like, hey, we could use the OCI layout format, right? This is a format that's kind of already been spec'd out, one that we use for build packages. And so thereby, if the exporter could export to an OCI layout format, then the export function of BuildKit could essentially just take whatever the output was and translate it over to LLB, which is like the mechanism necessary to be able to write this image within the Docker daemon context, right? With that being said, I don't think it's linked on there. Let me see, actually, yeah, it is. So if you go down, see that link at the bottom, the investigate BuildKit front end, Eric replied to it towards the end, the second to last comment. And he's kind of bringing up a good point that I hadn't really thought about, but it does seem weird that the exporter maybe has like too much of a responsibility, where it's, again, kind of talking about a daemon case, it's talking about image writing, and then it's now going to potentially talk about OCI layout format. And so it seems like the interface isn't quite as broken apart as it could be. So I think the proposal that Eric is bringing up is that we should find out what this interface should be, and then just have that be like the final exported mechanism that exporter provides, and then leave it up to the platforms to then be able to take that mechanism, take those outputs and put them in their final residing place, right? So for Pack, for instance, right, like we would take whatever the output is, imagining it's OCI layout, right, because it's easy, and then putting that into the daemon, right? Or taking those outputs and saying, okay, I'm going to put them into the registry, right? Or for the case of BuildKit, taking those outputs and saying, okay, I'm going to put them into this LLB or use this LLB interface. And then that would greatly simplify exporter to not have to deal with credentials or anything like that.
I think the reason exporter is so integrated partially is because there are a bunch of interfaces that exist that are like write the OCI image to disk exactly as it is, or even like write a partial OCI image and put that to a registry. But because we're selectively creating and not creating some layers, it was efficient at the time it was written to integrate that API and the creation of the tarballs when necessary, or I would love to split those apart. I just wanted to say that if it's possible to do that, create different APIs and you inspect them differently. Sorry to interrupt. I got to drop for the next thing, but I just wanted to support that effort if we decide to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, because right now we get to skip during export ever thinking about writing certain layers, right? And so if we were to write a full layout, we would have to presumably pull those run image layers and write them, unless I haven't read the spec, but unless you can reference like remote layers here, right?
I definitely don't know the limitations, right? I think that's what warrants a little bit more investigation and thought, right?
Yeah.
But it definitely sounds like something worth investigating.
I agree.
Like, I mean, ultimately, right, what's going to be the next interface that we're going to have to integrate with, to be able to do something, right? So like in this case, Buildkit is up and coming and there's no way to integrate it as of right now, right? And so again, like, I don't know, something comes up within the Mobi project that then someone else wants to integrate. How many are we going to be able to support in the long term?
Yep, that makes sense to me. I like the idea of having, one or two formats that we export from, depending on what we need to support. One might be registry just because of efficiency, but it would be nice to be able to drop the daemon and have Pack do that business, and also, Buildkit, same thing. That makes sense to me, just from an architectural
Cool.
sort of.
Yep. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure who should do that investigation. I know I'm kind of looking at it more from the outside in, right? Bringing up ideas and really doing more of the UX perspective. I don't know if Emily has it on her plate to look at this proof of concept, but it'd be great if maybe we could get other eyes on it as well.
Yeah, that would be great. I have a lot of interest in Buildkit integration, but just not a lot of time right now. But yeah, hopefully we can get it on our radar. That would be great. I'll leave this in needs discussion because I do think we should create some issues, maybe not in this milestone or maybe in this milestone, because at least doing a tar sounds reasonably simple enough and would unlock the potential to play around with this a little easier. So.
Yeah, and I think the call out to like the optimization of having to refetch layers and stuff like that is a good call out.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I'll put that note in here. All right. I don't think Ben's here. Does anyone have any context on additional layer metadata on images?
I think I had some. I think what he's talking about, right, is the command where you see on the second screenshot, the command area is completely missing. And I know that this has been discussed a couple times, that it'd be great to put something there that at least describes from a high level, like what it was that happened in this particular layer, right? Like why this layer exists, essentially. And I think the further down the path, there were a couple of discussions about like potential options. Yeah, I think the last one, or that there were at least 2 or 3 different formats, and it would just be great to see what the interest is, and then maybe an RFC to get this included.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I think I'm also not particularly keen on JSON. Just seeing the result here, like I think it would be more useful for just readability, just at a glance. But because anything else, you're probably gonna want to pull the labels anyway. But maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, I guess how do we get this? Would this require an RFC? Probably, right? Changes the resulting image. So.
Yeah, I would think so, right? It would be a lifecycle implementation detail. So therefore, we probably want to spec it out so that there's some consistency in expectation to the output.
Yeah, I don't know if someone wants to drive that. If no one responds, I can take lead on that one. If no one responds in like by the next week or something, or next meeting.
You could probably update the what is it called? The label on this. At least for Pack, we have like a requires RFC.
Yeah, it has. It's already on RFC.
Okay, cool.
I'll remove the needs discussion. I think at this point we're okay with the idea. It just needs to be an RFC.
Yep.
I guess this brings in the question of like RFCs though. Like this could just be a platform, or sorry, a implementation level RFC, I guess. Like I don't know if it has to go to the wider group, but I guess because the spec would be affected probably, but I don't know. I know we've talked about that on and off various times. All right, the next thing on the agenda is review roadmap, which is not something we do all the time, so I don't think we have to do that today. There are, what, 20 minutes left. Does anyone have anything? The agenda was exporter strategy, which I believe you already discussed, Javier. So if there's anything else anyone wants to discuss, now's the time. I know it was brought up yesterday in the sync, talking about ARM and specifically what we need to push that forward. I don't have anything extra to add there. It'd probably be worth watching the recording if you didn't and you have some interest in pushing that forward. But it sounds like there is some interest in having that sooner than later. So, but I don't know what that means it depends on who you ask what that means. So we need to figure out how we want to approach that as a group. So I guess be thinking about, I think there's some issues in lifecycle already that talk about ARM and things like that.
Yeah, I think personally for me, what's unclear is the combination of the different pieces and what it means to support ARM, right? Like, is it generating an ARM image, through like 64 or whatever other, x86 build packs? Or is it everything from, pack to lifecycle to the build packs to the OCI image, all, being ARM 64?
Yeah.
That's what's still really unclear to me. Like, at what level do we actually differentiate? What's the most common or desired combination of all these tools to be on ARM?
Yeah, I think the desired is what I'm looking for as well. Like, I assume we'll eventually get there for all of it. But I don't know what needs to happen first. Like, I'm not sure what folks are really after.
Yeah.
Are they trying to build a builder that is fully ARM and producing ARM images, or would they like to just produce ARM from build packs that run on an x86 builder? Because those
Or
are
do they
two
just
different
want to run
elements.
pack
Yeah,
in an M1 Mac, right? And still produce the standard Linux platform x86 image.
Again,
yeah, that one would require nothing from lifecycle, right? In that particular case, I think, right, Javier? Because that would be recompiling pack, and because everything happens in container, it would just be pack communicating to M1 Docker to run under
Yeah.
Rosetta or whatever.
And I believe that's the work that's already been done by Docker, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Forgive me, I think Yael was saying something.
Yes, please.
No, just want to say that I think that at the end we will want to support all the configuration, like running pack on M1, but providing Linux like image, or like doing everything on M1 end to end.
Yeah, no, I think for me though, it's more like prioritizing, right? Like, which one's more important. And then I know we did this, like what we call a combinatorial kind of like matrix, right? To like, you put in all these pieces, right? Like, let's say in a spreadsheet, all these pieces, and then you determine like, okay, does this work? No, what's necessary to make this work, right? And like basically having this matrix to really comprehend where we're at right now with support and how we would be able to get to all green, right? Which I do agree, we want to get to all green, but there might be some very like easy things to do versus some very complex things to do.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So maybe that's the action item for support ARM, right? Is like create this matrix and do like a quick spike to see where we're at with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let me add that to the notes here.
I don't volunteer.
All right, I put it as an action item. I don't know who will take it. We can at least reference it next meeting if no one has done anything with it. And and dole it out at that point. If there's nothing else, I guess give everyone 15 minutes back. See ya.